The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners South Africa, or the ACFE, is a leading professional body committed to advancing ethics, integrity, and the fight against fraud and corruption through education, professional development, and collaboration. We are grateful as the NSG for their partnership in making today's webinar possible. And together, we are creating a platform for meaningful dialogue on integrity, professionalization, and ethical leadership in South Africa. My name is Angela Montana from the Directorate responsible for ethics, anti-corruption, and other governance training programs at the National School of Government, and I will serve as your program director for today's session. Today's conversation brings together senior leadership from government and the private sector to examine ethical challenges that we are grappling with as a country, as well as exploring practical pathways and foundational mechanisms to strengthen integrity, accountability, and professionalism. We will hear from our distinguished speakers, Dr. Mulifinyana Pera, on the manifestation of ethical decay in South Africa and what can be done, followed by Mr. Andrew McDonald, who will be talking about integrity in work and life. And we will have a response from Dr. Ayanda Nzaluba, who will provide his reflections before opening the floor for questions and answers. Perhaps before we start, let me put forth a few housekeeping rules. Please use the Q&A function for questions and keep your questions concise so that we can accommodate as many participants as possible during the segment. We will take all the presentations from our speakers as well as a response from Dr. Nzaluba before we open up for the questions at the end. Please ensure that your names are correctly captured. This is very important to record your attendance. If, for example, you have yourself as Samsung S23, kindly change that so that we get your full names. And this is very important, especially for those that are going to be looking for CPD-related points. The link for the CPDs will be shared in the chat, and please use that to complete your details. The presentations from the speakers will also be shared at the end of, or they will be shared in the chat. We are going to move now directly to the session, looking to start. And first off, we have Dr. Mulifinyana Pera, who is the Director General of the Free State Provincial Government. Dr. Pera holds a PhD and a Master of Arts, an LLM, an LLB, and a BTech in Public Management, as well as several diplomas. He is an admitted advocate of the High Court of South Africa. He's an associate of the Chartered Governance Institute, registered as both a chartered governance professional and a chartered secretary, and is a chartered HR professional. He has been published in academia letters and previously commented on constitutional governance and law on SABC radios. Dr. Pera brings deep public service, legal, governance, and public administration experience to today's conversation. His presentation will help us reflect on the manifestations of ethical decay in South Africa and on what can be done, by focusing on the three approaches to ethical analysis, that is, virtue ethics, deontological ethics, and consequential ethics, drawing on ethical frameworks and the roles of leadership and institutions. Without going too far into his profile, I will hand over to Dr. Pera for his presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for the introduction, and I should not waste time so that I can go directly to the presentation. I hope it is clear. Is it visible, that side?
Not yet, Dr. Pera.
Yes, I'm getting there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we can see it. Thank you, Dr. Pero.
Thank you. That is fine. Program Director, I think when we address the topic of ethics, perhaps we should start from its philosophical underpinnings. And that's where I want to begin. You see, values represent the beliefs and desires and self as standard. I think these cameras, let me do this, represents the beliefs and desires and self as standard for conduct. And linked to that is normative values, normative ethics, which are in fact framework for ethics in society. As you have said in your introduction, I'll be talking about also 3 competing approaches to ethical analysis. That is virtue ethics, which focuses on the actions of the agent, the deontological ethics, which focuses on the act itself, and the consequentialist ethics, which focuses on the consequences. Virtue ethics is actually an Aristotelian concept, which tells us that there are 3 conceptions to it, which is virtue itself, the practical wisdom, and flourishing. What we learn from this is that people act who they are. If a person is kind, they will always be kind in all situations, irrespective of the cost of doing so, or irrespective of consequences to them. Fortunately, virtues are learned, are socialized. You do not necessarily born with them. So they can be taught, they can be promoted, they can be advocated for in society. Therefore, virtue ethics is about moral character of the agent or actor, and therefore, agent ought to possess certain qualities such as courage, generosity, compassion, etc. And this manifest in their actions. We see them. Now, part of the solution to moral decay in our society is actually to invest in the building of the virtues or character traits of all change agents, like public servants, like politicians, like business people, and so on. When I talk about deontological ethics, which is a Kantian concept, we are considering here the end result of it, that the end result of the decision is not really important. What is important is the moral basis of that decision. So therefore, this concept is more concerned with the morality of a person's action and not much with the consequences thereof. It surmises that everyone has imperative duties, and these duties must always be performed irrespective of the predicted consequences. I think the idea behind social compacts that President Ramaphosa early in his presidency was championing was based on this concept, because it wanted to canvass that there should be these positive duties for all South Africans in order to have an ethical public service in particular. And then consequentialism is basically a utilitarian theory of ethics, which is concerned with the consequences of themselves. The essence of it is that the consequence of an action ultimately determines the morality or immorality of the action. As a result, the means of arriving at the ethical decisions are only a secondary consideration, but the primary consideration is the consequence. I usually make this example that in a workplace where you have problems of sexual harassment or other forms of harassment, the best decision is to suspend the harasser or alleged harasser at the time the harassment is alleged, irrespective whether ultimately the harasser will not be found guilty or so on. So this is the example of what I'm talking about. And I often distinguish between the much ubiquitous consequence management, which we talk about every time, and this concept of consequentialism, because the former, consequence management, is the after-the-fact action to correct the unethical act, while the latter, consequentialism, requires us to think before we act so that the end result is ultimately ethical. So I'm saying in South Africa, we actually have ethical framework. And that ethical framework is our constitution itself. It is the one that says we must respect human dignity, equality, human rights, and freedoms of all. Well, you might say, what about personal values? If you take a value like human dignity, it cannot be possible unless you have personal value of respect of others, of respect of people generally. So it does encompass that non-racialism, supremacy of the Constitution, accountability, responsiveness, openness. These are the values that make us the nation, despite our diversity as people. But now, despite our constitutional directives, we do have crisis of governance and ethics in South Africa. I believe that the gains of the 1994 democratic breakthrough have been reversed. If one was to look just at the rolling back of the independent institutions built since the advent of democracy, I will talk more about this. The moral regeneration movement that was launched with much fanfare and talking about the RDP of the soul. This has disappeared and we don't talk about it much anymore. Now, this situation has so deteriorated that some observers are talking about crisis of legitimacy in our polity. Political development, unfortunately, is a reversible process. It can degenerate into political decay, despite an earlier promising start on a path to greater democratization. There is empirical evidence that the independent institutions in South Africa are decaying and that the state has been weakened, given the phenomena of state capture and grant corruptions. And recently, we are seeing and hearing in the Madanga Commission the continuation of the phenomenon of state capture in the security cluster. That's what I call crisis of ethics in South Africa, which is leading us to political decay, but also societal decay. Political decay is described as a negative change connected with a failure of the state to provide law, stability, security, and good governance. All these elements seems to be negatively affected as we go forward. The mere occurrence of political decay suggests moral decay, at least of the ruling elite. But you will see later I'm arguing that society is culpable in this. From this, we have this culture of it is our time to eat. Processes of economic development and transformation include the embedding of new comprada and property classes who seek to access resources. And because of this, they organize in networks to benefit from the largesse of the state. And in our case, we have Black economic empowerment. Itself a very good program, but that can be hijacked by nefarious agendas leading to corruption and rent-seeking. The phenomena of the so-called water mafia, construction mafia, is actually the case in point that I'm talking about. Political reforms come with the transaction costs, which end up undermining the reform process through corruption, cronyism, and political patronage. The thesis that Manzetti talk about is that reforms happen within the democratic polity, but within the context of weak institutions of accountability, vices such as corruption, cronyism, and patronage thrive. The main objective of weakening the state institutions of accountability during the infamous 9 wasted years in our country was to enable such vices such as corruption and state capture. But we are able to see that this was not completely stemmed, because we can see evidence of the deep-rooted corrupt actions in our polity. But is South Africa a weak state already, or we are advancing to being a weak state? Or are we doing enough to stem the tide towards a weak state? You see, we need to analyze 3 things to answer these questions. Whether this phenomena of state capture and grant corruption and ethical and other unethical conduct is just a sign of a system stress, which we see through the incompetence of state officials, corruption, and inadequate processes and systems to correct it, or whether we are in a state of dynamic equilibrium where government is already unable to deliver proper and quality services to the citizens, which may result in the task of service delivery being arrogated by institutions outside the public sector, with dire consequences for stability of governance. In some municipalities, you already have this situation where civil society is taking delivery of services themselves from the municipality. Or we are in a state of disequilibrium characterized by the survival of the fittest. I believe that because the state is still able to provide security to its citizens, it's still able to provide some services, and there is still some coherence, especially at macro political level. I believe that we are experiencing system stress. Therefore, we are not yet a weak state, but we are not doing enough too quickly to reverse our advance to the stage of disequilibrium. Now, what is to be done to turn the tide against our advance to the state of disequilibrium, to becoming a weak state? Then I borrowed this question of Lenin, and this question is more relevant in South Africa today. We really have to think of the restoration of morality in our national discourse, where change agents will think of themselves as the moral activists and change agents who will champion the cause of moral renewal. And then I suggest the following things to fix in order to achieve that. I'm saying we must fix ourselves as a people. And that is fundamental, because unethical conduct and corruption thrive because we, people, generally tolerate it. When our siblings, friends, acquaintances come with unexplained or unexplainable riches, we still embrace them. We don't scorn them. We don't frown upon them. We actually celebrate them, you see. And I really think public scorn and frowning upon unethical behavior is much more effective than law enforcement. If people can draw a line, then we can address this. But people generally are not doing that. We need to return to the campaigns such as moral regeneration movement and make it as much secular as possible, because I think what really led to the collapse of the moral regeneration movement was emphasis of more on religious values than on secular values of our society. All workplaces and governing bodies must have moral regeneration programs. It should be in the agendas of the social and ethics committees of our companies, including public entities. Community-based organization, but I must say also political organizations must have moral generation programs. So that is how to fix people That's what I'm talking about when I say we need to fix ourselves. We need to fix our politics, because politics is the noble calling if done for the good of society. But it can also be single biggest source of moral decay and failure of governance. If we imbue politics with morality, we imbue society with moral fiber. Ours is a multi-party political system, and until recently, it was one-party dominant political system. But it has reversed now. We know from the last elections, we are in a coalition arrangement, the government of national unity. But we still need moral political tone from the governing party in particular, and the all opposition parties in South Africa. We need active citizenry mobilized in civil society formations and other organs of people's power. Actually, we need this intra-political party and also interpolitical party. Within political parties themselves, we need to have these moral agents beginning to appear and take leadership, but also between the political parties themselves, we really need such an arrangement. When I say people should vote in moral change agents and vote out agents of corruption, I'm not necessarily talking general elections. I'm talking intra-political party elections as well. That's where change must happen. We need to fix leadership. We need exemplary leadership in society, in politics, in government, in business, in religious bodies, in civil society. We need leaders to lead the crusade against moral decay in our society and set the correct tone at the highest level. Leaders must be held accountable. The rule of law must apply equally to the ruled and the rulers. Our parliament, legislatures, municipal council must simply do their jobs and apply the rules of ethics within their respective competences. Professional bodies must come to the party and deal with the ethical decay of their members. We really need to see that often, and I don't think we are seeing that enough, or it's not public enough. It's too private. We need professional bodies to publicize what they are doing with their corrupt members. Leaders suspected of corruption and wrongdoing must step aside. I borrowed this language from the ruling party, but what it actually means is that people who are doing wrong must not continue to hold offices of authority. Now, closer to what the theme is about, basically, is of professionalization, is fixing our institutions. The era of grand corruption and state capture has seen our public institutions, especially in criminal justice, eroded of their independence and effectiveness. We know that the scorpion was taken out, and in its place, the hawks came. But a body like IDEC within NPA which was hailed as the rebirth of Scorpion, is proving to be disappointing. In the public discourse, we can hear that that is not really working. Maybe that is why this idea of the Office of Public Integrity is welcome, and it should come in as a Chapter 9 institution. Maybe with SIU forming key component of that. But we also know that even Chapter 9 institutions can be hemorrhaged of their independence and objectivity. We must guard against that becoming a norm. We need to appoint competent boards of directors to run our SOEs, appoint senior managers and public servants on merit, generally restore the integrity of the recruitment processes, stop the abuse of cadre deployment policy. And I must say I'm not against cadre deployment as such, but deploy competent people, deploy suitable people. But if you are not going to employ people who are suit for purpose, then you are abusing that framework. We need to improve the internal capacity to deal with unethical conduct. I think we need to replicate the establishment of the public administration ethics, integrity and disciplinary technical assistance units in provincial and local government. This body is provided for in Section 15 of Public Administration Management Act, but the Act itself does not replicate it in other levels of government. It is only within the DPSA effect. Now, if I were to conclude, I will say political and governance decay, including in the private sector, is the function of the broader ethical decay in society. These vices are simply the manifestation of society's moral decay. But we are not just helpless spectators as a people. We must join the crusade to restore ethics and morality in our society, including in our social institutions. I have proposed areas that need to be fixed in order to restore ethical governance in our public and business institutions. These are by no means the only areas that need fixing, but they will go a long way. Thank you very much, Chairperson. I hope I saved your time.
You did, and thank you very much, Dr. Pera. You spoke at length about what could be deemed the biggest crisis of our democracy, and this is the moral decay and its accompanied ills that comes up, the corruption and its erosive effect. In as much as we all know about corruption and its effects, platforms such as these are critical because they provide a mirror through which we need to question ourselves and the role that we need to play. You mentioned something important when you said we are not helpless. We still have a responsibility to play. And with that, I would like to ask the participants to also think about the problem, solution, and ask framework. Dr. Pera mentioned the problem. We know it, and he broke it down eloquently. And he provided several solutions to that problem. And the ask says, what is my responsibility as Angela in the whole thing? How am I joining the crusade? So let's think about that, and we can even include it in the discussion when we get to the Q&A. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Mr. Andre McDonald, who is a certified fraud examiner with more than 30 years of experience in forensic investigations across the public, private, and NGO sectors. Mr. McDonald currently serves as a specialist investigator in Nedbank's Group Financial Crime, Forensics and Security Department, where he leads complex investigations into fraud, corruption, misconduct, and ethical breaches across South Africa and Nedbank's Africa regions. As a former SAPS commercial crime investigator, Mr. McDonald has conducted investigations and fraud risk assessments both locally and internationally, including working across 32 countries. He is passionate about promoting ethical leadership, fraud prevention, good governance, and integrity, and regularly trains and mentors investigators and public servants in these areas. Andre brings extensive practical experience in forensic investigations, fraud prevention, ethics training, and organizational integrity. His presentation on masking the DNA of ethical standards, integrity in work and life, will bring a practitioner's lens to the topic of integrity and ethical conduct. Over to you, Mr. McDonald. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Good morning to everyone. It's really good to be able to join you this morning, so thank you for the opportunity. Let me share my slides with you, my presentation. If you can just hold for 1 second, just confirm once it is.
We can see it. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Right, so thank you very much, Dr. Ferrer. You've definitely set a great foundation for what I'd like to touch on today. So it's a great opportunity for me to launch into my topic, which is unmasking the DNA of ethical standards, integrity in work and life. And the thing is, the reason I said integrity in work and life is because we've got to ask the question, can we separate our integrity from our work life and our personal life? Can I say, well, I'll act with integrity in my work environment, but I don't necessarily have to act with integrity in my personal life because my personal life is my personal life. Or the other way around, I don't have to act with integrity in my work life, but I definitely have to act with integrity in my personal life. So, in terms of the theme that we're dealing with, a part of the theme says pathways to integrity. So in other words, for me, what that creates the impression of is we are making our way in our personal life and our work life towards that place of
Mr. McDonald? It looks like we have lost Mr. McDonald. Can I ask technical support to assist?
Yes, we have. We have seemed to have lost him. So let's give him a minute to maybe just rejoin the session.
All right.
He's back. Okay.
Thank you.
Kindly unmute, Mr. McDonald.
Good day. Did I drop off there for a second?
Yes, you did. Welcome back. Thank
Okay.
you.
So the important question for me and what I want you to ask yourselves is, what is integrity? Because this is a crucial question that could impact every decision and every action. So in your minds, just think of, well, how would you explain what integrity is? So for me, when I'm stuck with a bit of a predicament where I've got to explain something, I like to go back to the origins of what it is. what is the basis, what is the foundation of this actual thing? So when it comes to integrity, the actual word integrity comes from the Latin word integer. Now you might go, well, that doesn't help me at all. I mean, what is integer? And when you look up the true meaning and definition of integer, it means something that is undamaged, something that is whole. So in other words, it hasn't been tarnished in any way. It's completely whole. And excuse me if you see me flapping like a bird every now and then, because we've got a light sensor in this room that keeps going off. So I do apologize. It's something that is completely whole and untarnished, something that is pure. So that is the basis of the word integrity. It comes from that Latin word integer. So in terms of the word integrity, for me, it's referring to moral wholeness. Morally, everything is whole. It is untarnished, unblemished. So then we've got to ask ourselves, well, if that's the case, how then does integrity develop? How do we develop integrity? If it's so critical and so crucial, how do we develop it? And for me, integrity develops internally. That's where your inner values, your beliefs, your thoughts, everything is aligned completely with your actions. So your thoughts, your inner values, those convictions that you have inside, all of that, that foundation, it is aligned completely with your actions. That's integrity to me. It means that your inner values and your outward actions, they have to be the same. There can't be this separation from the two, that you have this inward value, but an outward action that's contrary to it. They have to be completely aligned. But integrity isn't about just saying honesty. Well, I'm an honest person. Integrity isn't just about honesty. It's about consistency. There has to be consistency between what we say and what we do, because what we say often comes from within. What we believe and what's inside us is often what comes out of our mouth. And those things, what we say, in other words, what we truly believe and what anchors us, has to align with what we're doing. So we can't just say I'm honest. I like to refer to this saying that I once heard from a second-hand car dealership salesman who said, I'm honest, but I'm not fanatical. So yes, someone can be honest, but not necessarily fanatically honest. So to me, what that statement says is that this person is leaving the door open for an opportunity to be unethical. You know, so I'm generally honest, but I'm not fanatical. So to me, it's about making decisions based on values. And this is the important part, even when no one is watching. And this is the most important thing, because wrong things are often done and schemed and planned and plotted in secret where no one else sees. So outwardly we're saying one thing, but inwardly and secretly we're doing another thing. So this is the most important thing, is that when we are not being watched or seen, what are our actions? We have to 100% lead with integrity, because when we lead with integrity, what this does is it creates trust. Now, trust is, I mean, absolutely a foundational thing when it comes to an organization. When we have a disciplinary inquiry against some staff member for misconduct, and they're found guilty, and it comes to the aggravating factors that we've got to present. One of the factors that we present is a breakdown in the trust relationship, because that's fundamental to an employee's relationship to the employer. And if there's a breakdown in the trust relationship, well, how can you ever continue any kind of working relationship? So for me, trust is critical in your work life and in your personal life. So what I'd like to do is define integrity. If we had to define integrity, this is what I would say, is that the first point there is that your actions and words have to be aligned. That's the first point. The second point is that the things you do in public and in private have to be the same. You can't have this split personality. We're not two people. We are one person. So you've got to act as one person. You can't have like the split personality. Well, in my work environment, I do this, I compromise my ethics, and my private life, I'm completely ethical, and I live with integrity. We can't have a split personality. Integrity means we live in work and private life exactly the same. And then it's also the state of being authentic in everything you do. Everything you do. So in other words, everything you think, every action, every word, it's the state of just being authentic, completely authentic. Often when I've interviewed someone who has been involved in misconduct, dishonesty, fraud, corruption, conflicts of interest, and you interview them and they say to you, and they confess to what they've done, and they say, oh, it's just, I'm not that person. I know that I did this, but I'm not that person. Don't see me as being this terrible, evil, wrong person. And that's the whole point, is that we have got to be authentic. If we're going to say, well, I'm not that person, then we cannot act like that person. We've got to act in the authentic person that we believe ourselves to be. So basically, the last point there is the alignment of inner self and action. So to me, ethics is the DNA of trust. The DNA holds everything, brings everything together. Ethics is the DNA of trust. If you want to be trusted, you have to live and work in an ethical way. It has to shape every decision you make. It has to shape every action that you take in your work life, in your private life. And not only that, it's also the backbone of fraud prevention. Without ethics, how are you ever going to prevent fraud and curb fraud? So ethics is absolutely crucial, and integrity is the central theme for me that brings the whole DNA together. So when I refer to DNA in the title of my message, there's a specific reason for it, because it's an acronym. And this is what DNA to me means. Number one, the D is duty. We all have a responsibility. Every single one of us, we have a duty to act with integrity. The second thing, the N, is for nobility, which means you've got to decide to choose the harder right way over the easier wrong way. And then the A stands for accountability. In other words, we have to own every decision and the consequences. And again, when it comes to our organization, when someone has done something wrong, and it's led to disciplinary action, and again, you're looking at those aggravating factors. Another point that we raise in aggravation is where a person hasn't taken accountability for their actions. They've tried to make excuses, they've tried to shift the blame to someone else, and there's just no accountability. So for me, in terms of the DNA, we have to take accountability for our own decisions and the actions and the consequences of our actions. So, how does ethical DNA impact our work and our private life and our fight against fraud? So anti-fraud, how does this all tie in? So what I want to do is I want to take the acronym and split it up into workplace, life, and anti-fraud as an example. So if we look at duty, in our workplace, we have a duty to follow the compliance protocols, the reporting of misconduct. There is a duty on all of us. If we are going to act with integrity, we have that duty in our workplace. And in our life, well, what duty do we have in life? Well, it's honesty in personal relationships, standing up for what is right. And then in fraud, anti-fraud, well, we have a duty to protect our organization and our stakeholders from fraud. When you sign your employment contract, you then have a legal responsibility to your employer to act with integrity and to protect the rights and the interests of your employer. So then let's look at nobility. And when I say nobility, for me, what I'm saying is moral excellence. How are we acting with moral excellence? That's, to me, is nobility. So in the workplace, it's about resisting pressure not to cut corners. In other words, I'll give an example there, falsifying reports. You can have pressure on you. This could impact our department. This could impact this or that. There's pressure on you to falsify information, falsify reports. No, you have to act in a way where you do not cut those corners. In life, well, it's about modeling ethical behavior for others. It might be how you model yourself towards your children, how you model yourself towards your family, how you model yourself in your community, towards your community. That's where nobility comes in. And then in terms of the anti-fraud link, well, nobility is rejecting bribes, shortcuts that enable fraud. Anything that you know is a compromise towards allowing fraud or enabling fraud, corruption, dishonesty, we have that duty and responsibility in terms of nobility. Then the last letter of the acronym DNA, accountability. Well, in the workplace, we've got to have transparent reporting, admitting our mistakes. We have got to take accountability. There's nothing worse when I'm doing an investigation and you go into a work environment, a different department or a division, and everyone just wants to shift the blame from one to the other, and no one wants to stand up and take accountability for their actions. In life, you've got to take responsibility for your personal actions. There might be your personal actions towards your family, things that you know are not right. Personal actions towards friends and family and your community and people around you. It's all about taking responsibility for those actions. And then the anti-fraud link, when it comes to accountability, you've got to ensure that fraud, corruption, dishonesty, whatever it might be, is always exposed, always reported and addressed in the appropriate manner, and not just buried and swept under the carpet and never exposed. We have to take accountability in our workplace, in our life, and when it comes to anti-fraud in our community, in our workplace, or wherever it might be. So the question is, well, okay, we understand we've got to act with integrity. I have a certain level of integrity. So how do I then develop this integrity? How do I create this better sense of integrity in terms of the decisions I'm making, the actions that I'm taking? Well, for me, integrity is shaped and molded and developed by a combination of personal and environmental factors. And that's what I want to delve into a little bit here in terms of understanding how do we develop integrity within ourselves. And the first thing for me is that this term personal moral compass. And I think Dr. Ferrer also sort of touched on this point at a certain level. And for me, when it comes to a personal moral compass, this compass, in other words, you can almost picture this compass inside you with, I've got integrity, honesty. Well, am I going to compromise? Is there deceit within me? The compass needle is constantly rotating within you, going to these various decisions that you've got to make. And it stems, this compass that you have, this internal moral compass, it comes and it's basically formed from the deep inner ethical standards that you set yourself, these foundations within you, which determine your level of conviction. So in other words, if you say I'm honest and I act with integrity, it's what is that level of conviction? Where is that needle that pricks your conscience, that establishes that level of conviction about you doing something or not doing something? And I would say that one of the biggest contributors towards establishing a moral compass. And I think Dr. Ferrer also mentioned that there is a responsibility on religious leaders to communicate these things when it comes to ethics and it comes to integrity. But for me, one of the strongest contributors towards establishing your moral compass comes through your religious beliefs, a belief in God. So, excuse me for a second while I get my lights back on. So, for many, faith is an absolute. So when it comes to your moral compass, it's like your supreme foundation for right and wrong. What they say is it offers clear ethical frameworks. It's a sense of ultimate accountability. When it comes to God, you say it's ultimately accountable to God. And this is what deeply anchors a human's behavior for someone who, say, models their compass on God. So, I mean, you could say that if you basing your foundation on God, it's like he's the ultimate moral lawgiver. So if you think in terms of a person's moral compass, it's often communicated through religious books. So if you look at Christianity, it's the Holy Bible. Through Islam, it's the Quran. Hinduism, it's the Vedas or Bhagavad Gita. Buddhism, it's the Tripitaka. So these various books that people can often base their moral compass on, of what those books say is right and wrong. Now, if you read through the holy books, often it gives moral laws, civil laws, ceremonial laws, and this is what starts to establish this inner moral compass of someone. Now, I'm not too familiar with the other books, the Quran or the Vedas, etc., but I can relate to, say, the Bible. So I'll give this as an example. If we talk about integrity in work and personal life, we know that, or I know that the Bible says that Moses went up on this mountain and met with God, and God with his finger wrote on 2 stone tablets the 10 commandments, and that's basically the moral law. So if you look at your private life, and if I had to apply that to myself in my private life, well, I know there were 2 laws that said, honor your father and your mother, and you shall not commit adultery. So for me, in a personal life, there's these laws that we say God has created for my moral compass to say, well, I've got to honor my mother and my father. I might not agree with it, but I honor them because that's what's expected. I honor my wife. I cannot commit adultery. I honor my wife because that is a law that has been established. So there my moral compass is set. Then if we talk about in our work life, we look at the 2 laws that state you shall not steal, or the other one commandment says you shall not bear false witness or lie. So now this establishes a moral compass within me where I've got to go, well, I cannot steal because that's God's law, or I cannot be dishonest, I cannot commit fraud, I cannot steal because it says you shall not bear false witness. So regardless of what has been used to establish your ethical coordinates, let's call them ethical coordinates on this internal moral compass of yours, whether it's God's commandments in the holy books, or you might say, well, I don't believe in God, therefore you go down to the next level and you go, well, then the government's laws, have the government's laws set your moral compass? Maybe it's your community leaders or your parents who have set that moral compass, or maybe it's just your employer. And you go, well, in my work environment, the employer has got policies and processes and guidelines, and that's what sets my moral compass. But it doesn't matter what has the source of that moral compass. I can tell you 100% that you will constantly be faced with decisions that will test that moral compass. You will be constantly weighing and assessing whether this action that I take, this decision that I make, you will be weighing and assessing. That moral compass will be spinning. That needle will be turning within you in terms of your convictions about whether I do this or I don't do this. So you will weigh and assess your values against justifying the act. You will weigh and assess compromise versus personal gain. If I compromise, but I can gain this, you've got to weigh up on your compass whether it's worth it. You will also weigh and assess your convictions versus consequences. Well, I know it's not quite what I would normally do, but I'll do it. But hold on, here's some consequences that I'm going to have to face. So I want to give an example. For instance, let's look at theft, right? And what factors contribute towards impacting our moral compass. So parents and teachers, right? We grow up as children, and parents and teachers, they say to us constantly, don't steal. Andre, it is wrong to steal. You must never steal. And then suddenly I'm faced with a situation where there's something in front of me and I'm tempted to steal. There's an opportunity to steal. Now, I will be weighing up and assessing in terms of that moral compass within me. Well, if I do it, it's going to disappoint my parent or it'll disappoint my teacher. Hold on, there's also consequences. I'll get smacked. When I was at school, you used to get a caning. Or there's a more serious consequence. I'll get expelled. So that moral compass, you weighing and assessing, is it worth it in terms of teachers and parents? Or if you look at your employer, you know that there's policies and processes, and then there's an opportunity to steal, and you go, well, if I do this, there's going to be a breakdown in the trust relationship. There's going to be a sense of betrayal. I could be dismissed. Is it worth it? We're weighing it up. We're assessing it. Then if it comes to the government, they have a law. You cannot steal. Unlawful to steal. All right, if I do it, well, I've got to weigh up now. Well, I'll be arrested. I could be convicted. I could be imprisoned. So we're weighing it up. There's this moral compass inside us that's assessing and weighing up all of these things. Then your moral compass, as I said, might be set by God. It says, do not steal. And then you go, well, if I steal, it's a sin. If I sin, I'm separated from God. Well, the consequences, I could go to hell, and that's where I spend the rest of eternity. So these are the different levels at which we're constantly assessing things. We're weighing them up. And I need to ask the question is, where is your moral compass set? What is the anchor? What is the source? What is the foundation of your moral compass? Because this will often determine the actions that we are prepared to take, and the things that we are prepared to do. So besides your moral compass, there are other things that impact on integrity and shaping of integrity. And one of the things besides the moral compass is upbringing and environment. Your fundamental principles, the things within you, those principles within you are often heavily influenced by your childhood, your upbringing, your cultural background, norms in society. These are the things that can that often determine what has shaped you when it comes to integrity. Daily choices, those are another thing. True integrity is forged through numerous small decisions and actions that you are constantly making and having to make throughout your day, especially, as I said, when no one is watching. Then another thing is that can impact and shape integrity are addictions. Because addictions fundamentally change a person's behavior and it impacts on a person's decision making. It often causes a person to compromise their morals, their values, and the sense of self. I always said that and I've seen it within my work environment when I investigate, and you can see people are addicted, say gambling addictions. Addictions turn people into liars. They lie to their employers, they lie to their family, they lie to their friends. Addiction definitely impacts on integrity, on a person's decision making and the values that they hold. So for me, the key word when it comes to integrity in the workplace and in your private life is this word here: compromise. We all have this moral compass within us. And the reason that I've put that word compromise at a diagonal is very specifically because compromise is a very slippery slope. It is a downward slope. That often leads to destruction. It could be destruction in your family life. It could be destruction in your work life, losing your employment, losing family members, a spouse, or whatever. Compromise is a slippery slope to destruction. And it impacts on integrity in two distinct ways. Number one is it erodes integrity. Compromise erodes, it's like a dripping tap on cement. Slowly but surely, it erodes through and breaks through eventually. So compromise erodes integrity. And then it also, compromise weakens ethical standards. Whatever those standards are that you have set for yourself, those inner standards, when you start to compromise, it slowly but surely starts to weaken those ethical standards. So when I think of integrity and compromise, when I take those two together, I often think of when my mother was in ICU. This was just before she passed away, and I used to visit her in hospital, and I used to see right down the end of the ICU was this glass cubicle where there was a specific patient inside that cubicle, and everyone that went into that cubicle had to put a hazmat suit on. And they had to wash up, and then they'd put this hazmat suit that completely covered their body from head to toe. And there couldn't be a single germ that entered that glass environment, because one germ could impact that person's body and lead to death. And that hazmat suit was to protect them. So in the same way, compromise is like a germ that has to be contained. Compromise has to be contained, because one act of one unethical act, one form of misconduct in your workplace or your personal life could result in losing your job or a spouse. So it's got to be that serious that you have this hazmat suit on, that compromise, the germ of compromise does not get out. The negative impact of compromising your core values. So when you compromise on non-negotiable principles, for you, what is non-negotiable? When you compromise on that because you want to achieve a certain goal, it damages integrity. That is the most important thing, because of that slippery slope, bending the rules. I'll just do it this once. Or I'll just do this one little thing. I know it's wrong, but it's just a little thing. It's much easier to compromise the next time. And then it's easier to compromise the next time. And it just becomes easier and easier. And it completely clouds your ethical judgment. And then what it does as well, there's an erosion of trust. Now, whether it's in leadership or personal relationships, repeated compromise of your core standards destroys credibility. And that is so important. You need to protect your reputation. You need to protect credibility. And not only that, when we do act in an unethical way, or we act in a compromised way, it leaves others feeling manipulated and even betrayed in our personal life and in our work life. So erosion of trust is so important when it comes to impact. And then not only that, the final thing I've said there is psychological stress, because acting against these deeply held beliefs, these inner values that you have, when you act against that, it creates this inner conflict, this guilt, this shame that happens. So often when I interview people, who have been involved in fraud or corruption or dishonesty, and I sit down with them and I interview them, and they then confess. The one thing that they say to me afterwards, wow, it is such a relief to now eventually get that off my shoulders, to get this thing off my back, because it's brought me such guilt, it brought me such inner shame there's been such a conflict because, as I said before, the person always says, it's not the person that I am. I'm not this person, but I compromised, and it just led to the slippery slope. So we've got to be very wary of compromise. And, you know, when it comes to ethics and championing ethics, it's very easy for us to demand it of others. You know, we'd say, this is what we expect. But, you know, when you're faced with your own moral dilemma, that time where the line between right and wrong starts to blur, suddenly our integrity is challenged in ways that we very rarely expected or anticipated. But that's where it is so important to know, where are the coordinates of your moral compass set, and where will that needle absolutely not go to at all. So in wrapping up, I just want to say that establishing ethics in a work environment involves creating a culture of and a system and practices that prioritize and sustain ethical behavior. You've got to have this environment where ethical behavior is lifted up, honored, and everyone is 100% certain of what is expected. It's got to align with values of integrity, fairness, responsibility. That's how people have to view it. So I just want to quickly share these 7 key strategies for establishing workplace ethics. So the first point there is develop a clear code of ethics. You got to outline the organization's values, the principles, expected behaviors. So at least people know this is what my organization expects. Then you've got to foster ethical leadership. You've got to ensure that leaders, the leaders of your organization, model ethical behavior. Their actions will 100% shape the organizational culture. What do they say? That it starts at the top, or the fish rots from the head. So it is so important that either you've got these ethical leaders and it cascades down to the rest of the organization, where everyone goes, my leaders act ethically, therefore I have this expectation that I must also act with ethics. Or my leaders are so unethical, they don't care about integrity, they act in ways that just, you know, are completely contrary, but because they do it, well, I can also do it. So we've got to foster ethical leadership. Then we have to integrate ethics into training programs. We've got to provide regular training, like what is going on here today. In our organization, we have developed internal training programs, fraud awareness programs, various training programs that we are constantly presenting to our staff on ethical decision making. We use real life scenarios and frameworks for staff. It's very important. Then we have to embed ethics in policies and processes. We have to integrate ethical considerations into core business processes, such as hiring, performance reviews, supply chain management. It's got to be embedded. Then we've also got to create a speak up culture. We've got to encourage employees to report unethical behavior. And importantly, without any kind of fear of retaliation, victimization, or harm. We've got to provide safe channels for them to be able to report, like anonymous hotlines. Point 6, we've got to engage stakeholders in ethical practices. We've got to involve customers, suppliers, communities in ethical initiatives. We've got to communicate to them, what type of conduct do we expect from you? It's very important. And then the last point is that we've got to monitor and measure ethical performance. You've got to regularly assess ethical behavior and culture to ensure that it's aligned with the goals of the organization. And you can use methods like ethical surveys, risk assessments, audits to track and the progress. And also use it to identify gaps in your organization. So to conclude for me, when it comes to integrity in work and in life, we need to walk the talk, where our stated beliefs, our promises, our commitments are aligned 100% with our actions. In other words, practice what you preach, because true credibility comes from doing what you say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald, for that energetic presentation. DNA, duty, nobility, accountability. Could that be the answer to the ask? I don't know. There are areas of overlap between your presentation and that of Dr. Pera, particularly when it comes to the key strategies to address issues of moral decay and ethical conduct. Dr. Pera said we are not helpless and that the decay is reversible through concerted multi-level effort. You said ethics and integrity should be in my DNA. My moral compass should also be informed by my ethical coordinates. Thank you very much for that. And I'm gonna now hand over to Dr. Nzaluba, who is our respondent for the day. But before I introduce Dr. Nzaluba, I need to just bring to everybody's attention that we are live and the recording can be accessed on the NSG's YouTube channel, and the link for the CPD points has already been uploaded, and those that require the points can complete that. Thank you to both speakers for grounding the discussion in both ethical theory and practical integrity challenges. I would like to invite Dr. Nzaluba to offer respondent reflections, drawing on his extensive leadership experience across public service, health, foreign affairs, and the private sector. Dr. Nzaluba is a medical doctor, health policy expert, and senior business leader who currently serves as Group Executive Director of Discovery Limited. He qualified as a medical doctor in 1982 and later specialized in OB/GYN. He also holds an MSc in Health Policy, Planning and Financing from the University of London, and he has an Executive MBA from the University of Cape Town. Dr. Nzaluba has held several influential leadership positions in South Africa's public and private sectors. He served as the DG of Health, during which he played a key role in health policy development and represented South Africa at numerous international health forums. He later served as the DG of Foreign Affairs, overseeing South Africa's diplomatic relations and the implementation of its foreign policy worldwide. Since 2011, he has been a Group Executive Director at Discovery Limited, bringing extensive expertise in healthcare, international relations, government affairs, and strategic leadership. He continues to serve on various national and international boards and advisory bodies focused on health, education, diplomacy, and development. Dr. Nzaluba is also a fellow of the NSG. He has a very colorful career with a lot of experience and expertise in different areas. Unfortunately, I couldn't go through the entire CV. I had to summarize. But with that, I would like to hand over to you, Dr. Nzaluba, for your response. Thank you.
Reverend Director, thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank my fellow panelists. Thanks, Dr. Pera, for that absolute tour de force. And thanks, Andre, also for your clear insights. I think those have laid the foundation for this session. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. It's a privilege to contribute to a dialogue that brings together policymakers, public servants, academics, civil society, private sector, and professional bodies around a shared national concern, how South Africa strengthens ethics and integrity in practice. South Africa's ethical landscape is shaped by both inspiring and difficult histories. Our liberation struggle demonstrated extraordinary moral leadership, sacrifice, and commitment to justice. We salute leaders such as Nelson Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, Walter Sisulu, and many others who embodied values that transcended personal gain and placed the dignity of others at the center of public life. At the same time, our current context is marked by persistent ethical dilemmas, corruption, inequality, governance failures, economic disparities, and shifts in public culture that have weakened trust in institutions. These challenges are not abstract. They affect national development, they affect social cohesion, and they also affect the ability of citizens to believe that public and private institutions will act in the common interest. Having listened to the preceding presentations on the manifestations of ethical decay in South Africa and the role of integrity in work and life, I would like to focus my comments on a related but slightly different question, which is really how do we move beyond identifying the ethical failures and beginning building systems that consistently produce ethical behavior? Put differently, how do we translate ethical principles into organizational routines, professional standards, and daily conduct? South Africa's challenge, I would argue, is not simply a shortage of ethical people. Our challenge is that integrity has not been sufficiently institutionalized through professionalization. Ethical behavior must not depend on who occupies an office. It must be embedded in the systems, in the standards, and in the culture of our institutions. So we must move beyond the language of ethical failure. After years of commissions, and I think Dr. Pera made reference to this and Andre, after years of commissions, reports, and exposés, South Africans understand the problem. We know the cause of corruption. We understand the consequences of weak accountability. The real question is, how do we build institutions that make ethical conduct the norm and unethical conduct the exception? The webinar's focus on the foundations and challenges of ethics is therefore important because it invites us not only to diagnose ethical decline, but also identify practical strategies for restoring public trust and strengthening a culture of integrity across all sectors. This is where professionalization becomes critical, and this is very important, especially now that we are having the seminar under the auspices of the NSG. Professionalization is often discussed as a human resource issue. It is not. It is an ethical issue. Professional institutions are characterized by merit-based recruitment, by clear standards, by continuous learning, by accountability mechanisms, consequence management, and service-oriented culture. When these elements are present, institutions are more likely to act ethically, regardless of political, economic, or social pressures. Professionalization creates a disciplined environment in which people understand not only what they're expected to do, but why it matters and what consequences follow when standards are breached. South Africa has got strong ethical foundations, I would argue, but weak ethical translation. One of the paradoxes of South Africa is that over the years we have developed extensive legislation, governance frameworks, professional codes and oversight institutions, a very progressive constitution that Dr. Pera eloquently alluded to, strong governance frameworks generally, public service codes, King 5 principles now in anti-corruption legislation. So the challenge is not a shortage of principles. The challenge is translating principles into everyday behavior. In many respects, South Africa's challenge is less about a values gap and more about an implementation gap. The gap between values and practice is fundamentally a professionalization gap. We tend to have expectations that we ourselves are not prepared to honor. And I think that is why both speakers referred to the role of the citizenry in holding those in office or in high public places accountable. This is where education, leadership, and policy reform intersect. Education builds ethical literacy, leadership sets expectations and models conduct, policy creates the architecture to which ethical commitments are operationalized. But without professionalization, these elements remain vulnerable to inconsistency and personality-driven application. So integrity must be designed into our institutions. Too often, I think, given the history of some extremely heroic leaders that we've had that have guided us through very difficult moments, we tend, unfortunately, to look for heroic leaders who will save institutions. While ethical leadership matters, institutions cannot depend on heroes. Integrity should be embedded to competency requirements, to professional standards, to oversight, to performance management system, transparent procurement, and ethical leadership development. The test of an institution's integrity is whether it remains ethical when leadership changes. An ethical institution is one in which support systems, good conduct, expose poor conduct early, protect those who raise concerns, and make accountability predictable rather than exceptional. And a lot of this has been contained in the inputs that have been made by both Andre and Dr. Perry. So, given the context of the National School of Government, I would argue the public service must become a profession. Many respected professionals have three characteristics. They've got defined standards, they've got certification and competence, and consequences for misconduct. South Africa's public service increasingly needs to be viewed in similar terms. We are custodians, and public servants are custodians of public trust. Professionalization must mean appointing the right people, developing them continuously, holding them accountable consistently, and creating pride in public service excellence. It also means strengthening networks amongst those who are committed to ethical conduct so that integrity is not experienced as an isolated personal burden, but as a shared professional identity. We often discuss ethics as a moral issue. It is also, I would argue, a developmental issue. Investors invest where institutions are trusted. Citizens cooperate where government is credible. Economic growth accelerates where governance is predictable. Therefore, professionalization is not only about ethics. It is about state capability, it's about economic growth, it's about our national development agenda. If ethical erosion weakens governance, social cohesion, and economic confidence, then in fact, professionalization is one of the practical pathways to which we rebuild trust and our capability. A webinar of this nature should leave us not only with the insight, but with direction. The expected outcome should be a stronger shared understanding of the challenges, deeper collaboration across sectors, and practical recommendations for policy, community engagement, education initiatives, and institutional reform. And I really want to thank both Dr. Pera and Andre for beginning to point us in that direction with very practical suggestions as to how we move forward. That means asking some concrete questions also. I think in the context, particularly of the NSG and our public service, we have to ask, are our appointment processes sufficiently merit-based? Are our standards clear enough? Do we train people continuously? Do our performance systems reward ethical conduct? Do our accountability mechanisms operate consistently? And do our institutions encourage citizens and employees to participate in strengthening integrity? South Africa does not need to choose between ethics and development. Societies that institutionalize integrity through professionalization are better placed to achieve both. The challenge before us is to move beyond seeing ethics as an individual responsibility alone. We must build institutions where integrity is expected, it is supported, it is rewarded, and it is sustained. So I would argue that as we think through and we think ahead, particularly about the public service reform and the professionalization of our public service in particular, we see professionalization not simply as an administrative reform. It is the pathway through which constitutional values become lived realities, through which public trust is restored, and through which we strengthen the future of South Africa and our democracy. I would like to stress again, yes, individuals are important. There's an onus on every one of us to be conscious of what we do, to conduct ourselves in a manner that is exemplary. But I would argue that for us to build a sustainable nation, for us to succeed, we should go beyond depending on the character of a few individuals. Integrity should be the property of the institutions we lead themselves. And I would argue that professionalization is how we achieve that. And once again, Angela, thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me to this. I think this is a very exciting time for us to be reflecting on this sort, having this type of discussions, both in the context of the very fascinating reforms taking place, driven by the National School of Government, which is hosting us today, but also far much more importantly, as we reflect on some of the things that we witness every day about the breakdown, and sometimes we sleep with heavy hearts. But as our previous speakers have said, I think there's no time for us to despair. We have to stand up, we have to hold each other accountable, hold hands across the divides, and make sure that we lead our country forward. And I think the discussion we're having today sets the platform for us to begin to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nzaluba. You know, in our culture, we say once an elder, the wise one has spoken. And in this case, it's Dr. Nzaluba as the respondent. You do not come and paraphrase and want to add your spices, because you have captured everything and you have responded adequately. Thank you once again, Dr. Nzaluba, for that. I want to go to the Q&A before we see if we can open for active discussion with the participants. There is a question from Kinosi Mutsemme, who's saying, how do you fix the ethical leadership when later you become an enemy to be hunted? Can I ask Dr. Pera to take that? I will indicate which panelist should take which question. Can I ask Dr. Pera to please respond to that one? How do you fix the ethical leadership when later you become an enemy to be hunted?
Thank you very much, Program Director. Yes, taking ethical stance is not a popular thing. It will not make you a celebrity. Yes, so it must be a personal and professional conviction that you believe in, and you must do it because it is for the good of the society. It is for the good of the future of your children, grandchildren. So the fact that you become unpopular is the price you should be paying. And in my view, of course, it's a small price, but remember, for some people, it's a very big price. Others lose lives for being ethical. That is where issues of whistleblowers protection comes to the fore, to say that unfortunately, this thing doesn't end where we just hate such people. Sometimes there is action that follow that hate. And this is where government and everyone else has moral duty to protect the whistleblowers. And even those who are not whistleblowing, just doing the right thing every day. They need to feel valued. They need to feel appreciated. They need to be encouraged on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pera. The next one is for Mr. McDonald. This one is a bit loaded, Mr. McDonald. It's questions and comments in one. It's from Advocate Kuni Ditir. Society is important in building an ethical culture. Who are the role models? Showing off wealth, which sometimes is acquired illegally, makes others to do the same. Can patriotism and being jealous of community property not assist? Schools, churches, public buildings are vandalized for immediate gratification. Municipalities continuously replace stolen infrastructure only to be stolen again soon. As community, we should shame those who do these things, but that can only work if we could go back to the closely knit community, taking responsibility for the moral well-being of each other and not looking the other way around. So the question in this case is, who are the role models? And can patriotism and being jealous of community property not assist in protecting some of the assets that we have? Over to you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you for that. I think you need the word doctor in front of your name to answer that question, but Mr. McDonald will make an attempt. Look, I was actually just discussing this with a colleague this morning about people living above their means, about people seeing in community, seeing on social media, the lifestyle that people are portraying. Look what I have. Look what I have accomplished. Look at the fruit of all my labor. Where half of the time, people on social media are not living the life that they are portraying, or they are reasonably living that life, but they, behind the scenes, are living in debt, huge credit, under huge financial stress to try and portray this type of life. Generally, what we'll see in the community are these people who are involved in corrupt practices, who are using laundered or the proceeds of crime to live these lavish lifestyles. And we look at them and we go, yes, I also want to live that type of life. I also want to live that. But are you prepared to compromise your convictions? Are you prepared to compromise your values, to live that life, to have that possession? This is a question that we've got to ask ourselves. And we've got to ask ourselves, well, is that the type of role model that I really want to model my life after? Is that the type of role model I want my children to see and model their lives after? A life of crime, a life of corruption, a life of dishonesty, a life of stealing from the public to benefit personally? These are the questions that we've got to ask ourselves. And often people say, well, I'll do whatever it takes to live that type of life. Well, that's a decision that you've got to make. But then you've also got to live with the consequences. So yes, I'd say we've got to look at rather people who have accomplished things in life, but have done it the right way, that have started from nothing and through an ethical business and through ethical ways have built up that business to something that is great, and they're living the lifestyle and living the fruits of what they've accomplished through hard work, through integrity, through ethics, and not taking shortcuts and the easy route through crime. So you've got to make that decision. How do I want to get to that destination? Is it the easy way through compromise, through compromising all my convictions and values, or is it through hard work? Because it is easy. And I must say, this was the one way when I worked in the commercial crime unit, when I was searching for suspects. It was so easy to often find people who were involved in corruption or fraud because they love to flaunt it. They love to flaunt it. Easy come, easy spend. And it was easy to track them and find them because they love to just display the spoils of their work. But there are consequences. So you've got to choose whether you're prepared to face those consequences or not. But we need to look to leaders who have done it ethically. We need to look at leaders and role models who have done it the right way, not the easy shortcut way.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Thank you for that response. Dr. Nzaluba, I would like to direct this one to you because it aligns with what the focus of your response was. It's actually two questions, but they are both focusing on professionalization. The first one, and they're both from Tabiso Majavu. I hope I said that correctly. If professionalization is the pathway and integrity is the destination, what fundamental changes must South Africa make to ensure that this journey produces professionals who serve society rather than merely advance within institutions? The second question, in a country where public trust has become one of the greatest measures of institutional legitimacy, how can South Africa redefine professionalization so that integrity is not merely expected from professionals, but becomes the defining purpose of professionalism itself? Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Nzaluba.
No, thanks very much, and thanks for the question. The first point I would really like to make is that I mean, if we trace our history, and I'm happy Dr. Pera made reference to this because it's something that I always grapple with and I've argued with people on. You referred to the issue around cadre deployment, and I want to be very controversial as I build up to this issue. And I share the same view that Dr. Pera has. There's nothing wrong with the principle, with the issue of cadre deployment per se. I think what is at issue is the motive and what underpins the decision to, because cadre deployment, as was utilized in our government, for example, in the early stages, was far much more about recognizing, looking at people with potential, with certain capabilities, and knowing that there's a certain opportunities that they've not had in the past and building them to the center, supporting them and giving them space to grow. And many of us are beneficiaries of that. I count myself amongst those who are beneficiaries of that. But at some point, this became completely corrupted. The motive beyond picking individuals about self-serving interests, not about the common good. So coming then to the question is that as I was indicating, I think we have first of all to understand that if, as South Africa is committed to, we truly want to build a developmental state that is responsive, that is capable, that serves the interests of our people, it is not possible to do that without building a professional cadre to lead our public service. And so if we start from that basis, then in fact, we then have to understand that whatever the obstacles, whatever the difficulties we are going to face on the way, and there are many of those difficulties, but there's no other path. The only path that will enable us to build a sustainable, capable state that responds to the needs of the citizens of the country is by us understanding that we have to professionalize certainly the public service. So that is the That is the starting point. We also have to understand, for those who are in senior positions in government, and this relates to the first question that was raised that Dr. Pero responded to. Leadership is hard. Leadership is dangerous. And if you want to lead, you must understand that and be ready to take the consequences of that. It is not a popularity context. And if you want to lead in the context where you want to professionalize an institution, then you must understand that you've got an obligation and understanding that you are going to have to take very difficult decisions. And some of those decisions are going to be unpopular. But the thing that should always make you very happy is that those firm decisions will open up paths for individuals who will actually have a significant impact in our society. And so that is the way I look around.
Dr. Nzaluba? Have we lost Dr. Nzaluba? It looks like we've lost him.
Yes, we have lost him.
Okay, not a problem, but I think we got the response to that question. So I'm going to... Oh, my apologies for that. For this one, I would like to ask Dr. Pera to respond to it. It's actually two questions coming from two different people. But before I go to that one, I need to acknowledge Rasi's question. It has been responded to, the one about whistleblower safety. From Sisheme Mohokani and Lebo Apiri. The first one says, my observation of ethical behavior is that it's focused on lower ranking officials. Senior managers and political leaders seem to be excluded or not expected to be ethical or are automatically ethical and do not need laws to make them ethical. Okay. How can the senior managers and the political leaders be forced to behave ethically? The key word is forced. The second question relating to that one, do the speakers believe that it is possible to turn unethical leaders into ethical leaders? Lebo says they don't believe it is possible. But now my next question is why and how are unethical leaders still in leadership? Then we expect to see changes. Slightly impossible. Dr. Pera, there's a dilemma there. Do we think leadership is capable of change? And why are they still in leadership?
Yeah. Yeah, what a difficult one. I said in my presentation, this ethical ethics can be trained. That people are not born with virtues; they are socialized into them. They gain them by habituation, and I therefore believe that an unethical leader is not a lost case. They can be rehabilitated. But of course, it irritates public to recycle unethical leaders. They do something wrong today, live public life for a few years, and re-emerge as if sanitized on the other side. That irritates community. But it does not mean that once unethical, always unethical. I do believe that people learn to change. People learn from their mistakes, and that good ethics can be taught. I really believe in that. So leaders can change and can be changed. Yes, this thing of focusing on lower ranking employees instead of senior management for ethical lapses. I think the questioner is right. And I want to make an example with a minor thing without belittling unethical questions. The issue of late coming. You see, it is a norm for us senior managers to rock up at work around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, leave around 2 o'clock, have long lunches outside offices with friends or clients or whatever, but we do that often. If our subordinates were to do that, we would say they are misbehaving and so on, you see. So I really think that's where it starts. The idea that you can get away with misbehavior as a senior manager, as a senior leader. It starts with expectation that certain rules do not apply to you because you are senior. You don't need to arrive at 7:30. You see, because you are senior. You can leave at any time you want because you are senior. Even though you do not have a work at home policy, you apply that privilege to yourself and not to the organization. And if your subordinates were to do the same, you would think it's misconduct. I think that is basically the problem. That problem is there. If you can take the issue of we have cell phones from the employer as senior managers. We use them for work, but we also use them for our private calls or private messaging or whatever. And the clerk in the office who uses desk phone to call home to check on their family, we think that they are misconducting. So the point I'm making is that that question is not really small. In the bigger scheme of things, it's big because the way we are treated as senior managers, we end up thinking doing wrong is right if it's done by us, and it's wrong if it's done by our subordinates. And that must be challenged. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pera. Mr. McDonald, you are taking the last few questions. I'm clumping them as one. If you could give the shortest response possible. How do we hold accountable officials who are violating the core values? How do we hold even institutions accountable? What do we do? How do we punish? What do we do? And to that, how do we encourage public servants or officials to continue doing good in a government system or workplaces that do not show any appreciation for good behavior? Thank you.
Okay, yes. Sorry, my light. Yeah, this is a difficult one. If appreciation is not being shown, or if good conduct, acting in an ethical manner is not highly esteemed in an environment. But, you know, for us, and I'm talking about now the private sector and the corporate world, We have what we call a zero tolerance policy to fraud, corruption, misconduct, reputational damage to the organization. And what that zero tolerance means, that if someone commits an offense that, say for instance, they steal 1 rand, or if they steal 10 million rand, our response is always consistent. There is zero tolerance. You have to be dismissed for dishonesty. There's no question about it. So there's a very clear standard that has been set in our organization. So any staff member who acts with integrity, it's promoted. So in other words, if someone comes forward and discloses or divulges misconduct or fraud or corruption, we actually reward them. We've got a rewards process where we will assess what it was that was divulged, what was the potential reputational impact, what was the financial impact, and we will actually award that person for coming forward and being accountable in terms of reporting misconduct that could potentially impact on our organization. So we've got to be and create an environment where people who are acting ethically, people who are acting with integrity, people who come forward are actually honored. And we also communicate that. We communicate it within an internal broadcast within our organization that if a person wants to remain anonymous, they can, but if they do come forward and reveal their details, we will communicate that to our employees so that everyone is aware of the standard that we are setting as an organization. So I would say that we've really got to set a standard, and we've also then got to live by that standard uncompromised. In any way, shape, or form, so that we clearly communicate to people what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and what the consequences will be. And I think we need to honor people who do live by that standard.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Unfortunately, due to time, we have to end our session here, because we have committed to 2 hours for this session. We realize now with the discussions that we need to have even more of these webinars, because we're still getting more questions in the chats, which the speakers will take on the side. But for now, we have to close the session. The issues raised today remind us that professionalization is not only about the skills and systems, but also about values, leadership, accountability, and the daily choices that shape public trust. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Mulifinyana Pera, Mr. Andre McDonald, and Dr. Ayanda Nzaluba, for your valuable contributions. Thank you also to our partner, ACFE-SA, and to all the participants who logged in and participated, engaged in this important discussion on ethics, integrity, and professionalization. I would like to encourage you to look out for more invitations to webinars on our socials, and also to enroll for NSG training programs, especially the one on ethics in the public service. It's free, it's online, and open to all public servants. We appreciate your participation and wish you a productive day further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.